And welcome to this CNBC Africa special interview with Nigeria's Minister of Mines and Steel Development, Kayode Fayemi. I'm Onyi Sunday. Now, as Nigeria intensifies its drive to diversify its economy in the wake of low oil prices, let's get an insight into how Nigeria's mining sector is aligning with that vision. Thank you so much for your time, Honorable Minister. Now, there are those who say Nigeria's mining sector is moving in a cycle. They say 1 year after, not much has been done in that space. For some, to actually buttress that fact, they say the Mineral and Mining Act of 2011 remains the same. No change in regulations, whatsoever. What's your take on this?
Well, that would be a misreading of what is going on. The idea of transforming the sector should not just reside with changing law. That in itself is a problem. If you change the law governing a particular sector at every opportunity, with every change of government, you are actually giving a sense to the average investor out there of policy uncertainty. And that's not the vision here. The vision here is to make sure that the mining sector works for the Nigerian economy by increasing the revenue that it generates and the jobs that it provides. And if you look at the roadmap that was approved by the Federal Executive Council on the 31st of August this year, it actually sets out the trajectory from where we were when we came into office to where we want to be 25 years down the line. It's not just a quick win plan. It's a long-term development plan for the sector. So if anyone were to say to you that we're moving in circle, the person really hasn't taken the pain to understand what is happening in this sector. But they also haven't looked at the peculiar context of this sector. This is a sector that used to generate 4% of the GDP up till the 60s. And then we discovered oil and gas, and everything went downhill because we stopped paying attention to mining. And it's one thing to be minerals rich. It's another thing to be a mining nation. It takes a whole lot of effort to become a mining nation. Many countries are minerals rich. It's not a big deal to have minerals. It is what you do with the minerals you have. But in terms of the geological prospectivity, what's the quantity, what's the quality, what's the commercial viability, and what you do with the legal and regulatory regime, as well as the fiscal incentives available for the investors in the sector. These are the areas that this government is focusing on in order to generate jobs and to increase the revenue. And that's beginning to happen. All you need to do is check the Bureau of Statistics' latest quarterly report. And only two sectors grew at a time that Nigeria has entered recession. It's only agriculture and mining.
Interesting. Before we just get to the roadmap you mentioned earlier on, let's try and assess the current situation today. How business-friendly is Nigeria's mining space?
The Nigerian mining space is probably the most business-friendly of all the sectors. Of course, you have to locate that within the context of doing business in Nigeria generally. The mining space is not isolated from doing business in Nigeria, but in terms of the certainty of the environment, we have strictly adhered to the promises we've made. When you apply for a license and the space that you applied for is available, within a month, you will get your license.
Now, going back to the roadmap you talked about, now what milestones should investors and other stakeholders be tracking in the development of the detailed execution of this strategy?
Well, what we have done is to say to the average investors that it's no longer business as usual in the mining sector. When I came into office, I reviewed all licenses. And the licenses that are not being fully utilized, we ensured that those who own such licenses, they lost them, because there's a use or lose principle in the mining laws in Nigeria. And one of the things that really worries investors is the enforcement of our own laws. If we say that a license is available for 5 years as an exploration license, and you don't do anything in that space, you ought not to retain such a license. So people need predictability in the mining environment, and we have put that predictability in the execution of the law and in the enforcement of the regime. Another challenge is the relationship between the federal government and the states. As you know, mining is the exclusive preserve of the federal government of Nigeria. But that is more theoretical than real. The land where the resources are located is the exclusive preserve of the states. So you need an arrangement that strengthens partnership and collaboration between states and the federal government and the host communities. And that's what we've managed to also establish, in which everybody sees it as a win-win situation, and you don't just give a license without ensuring that the state is aware of who you're giving the license to, so that somebody doesn't just accidentally walk up to a community and say, I'm here to mine. So there has to be a very clear collaborative relationship between the various sectors: industry, academy, the ministry, the host communities, and the states. And that is something that roadmap clearly establishes. 3, the roadmap establishes a regulatory authority that brings together all of our agencies responsible for regulation, whether it's environmental compliance or mines inspectorate or mining cadastral office, into one autonomous body that is not micromanaged by the ministry. Because right now, what happens is that the ministry still plays a very, very central role in that regulatory responsibilities that we have. That's good, and it's doing quite its best in that. But that gets to a point where it can no longer grow. And that's why we need an independent regulatory framework that is not micromanaged by the ministry. So that's in the roadmap. Then the roadmap privileges beneficiation and processing, because right now, because we don't know what we have, people just take the bulk of what we have out without let or hindrance.
You know, I was really going to come to that to address, of course, illegal mining in the country. You know, you mentioned something really key there: collaboration between the federal and state governments. There are players, the stakeholders in the mining sector, who say there are not enough inspectorate officers in most of the local governments in the states to monitor what's going on. My question is illegal mining still a major problem in the sector in Nigeria today?
Obviously, illegal mining is a major sector in every mining jurisdiction, because what is illegal mining? If you strictly describe illegal mining, it is the violation of the law in the exploitation of resources. If you haven't got a license and you are exploiting resources and selling such resources, it's theft.
How do you plan to check this?
Well, 2 ways. The law still has to be enforced, and we will do everything within our powers to enforce the law. That's why we have set up a mine surveillance task force that comprises of the police, of the FCC, of the Department of State Security, and of the Civil Defense Agency, so that all of them come together in the detection and stoppage of illegal mining. But that's a law and order response to it, which is inadequate. The bulk of those who are involved in illegal mining are just doing it to eke out a living, to survive. And more often than not, they come from those communities where these resources abound. So to them, it's their ancestral land. How can you tell them that they're illegal? They don't understand what you mean by that. So the alternative approach we have is to properly register these people, help them organize themselves better into a cooperative, give them access to finance, give them some legitimacy by awarding licenses to them for small tracts of the space within which they operate, albeit illegally, and then also tools and capacity building for safer mining practices, because they're doing a lot more damage to themselves. Yes, they make a quick buck. Even more often than not, even that quick buck, they're being cheated by the middlemen who buy the stuff from them. But for them, half a loaf is better than nothing, especially in a poverty-stricken environment. So we must look at mining as a poverty eradication strategy.
Well, I'd like you to give us some clarity on the timeline for this proposed $500 million investment fund, but that will be after this short break. The rest of the discussion continues after the break. You stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're watching the CNBC Africa special interview with the Minister of Mines and Steel Development, Kayode Fayemi. We're talking about how well this sector is aligning with Nigeria's vision to diversify its economy. Now, just before the break, you were going to give us some clarity on the timeline for this proposed investment fund. Talk us through this.
Well, I know timelines are attractive, particularly to journalists. You want to know when.
To journalists, investors want to know as well.
Well, okay. Also to investors, but we also must be mindful of the fact that there are certain sectors that are not that really don't lend themselves easily to quick wins the way we see quick wins. Having said that, we operate from the perspective that there's a lot of idle capital out there looking for serious investments over the long term, and that we can access such funds if we provide bankable projects. And that's purely what this investment fund is about. We are in very, very progressive conversations with the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority to help us. I mean, they have the expertise. We don't necessarily have it, and they would source for this, but in a manner that it's not a government-driven initiative. Yes, we can help look for people who can access such funds, but we're not going to manage the funds. That's what we're doing with them. And we believe that within the next year or so, this should be fully ready, given the state of our current discussions with the NSIA. But the flip side of that is the corporate bonds that we're discussing with the stock exchange, Nigerian Stock Exchange. Because again, mining has not been on the front burner in Nigeria for understandable reasons that we've discussed. But increasingly, there's a renewed interest. And the stock exchange is also talking to us about how to structure a corporate bond that can be jointly managed by government and other private sector stakeholders who are interested in mining or see themselves being interested in a long-term investment initiative. But we are also not just going into this as freeloaders. Government is interested in utilizing the Natural Resource Fund of the federal government, at least parts of it, to drive this process by putting some seed funding into that, so that those who want to do this have somewhere to go to. The way you have Anchor Borrowers Program for agriculture, you have NASAL Fund for agriculture, you have CACS Fund for agriculture, you don't have that in mining. And we believe that mining deserves a lot more than that over the long term if we want to make a headway in mining.
But then, of course, the Miners Association of Nigeria at the moment are calling for the CBN to facilitate, or rather fast track.
Fast track, that's the real sector fund that CBN has. It's not specifically for mining. It's not that there's no borrowing program for mining at all. That's not what I'm suggesting. But it's buried inside some other funding. if you go to Bank of Industry and you want to do manufacturing or you want to do industrialization, running a quarry or that, yes, you can apply and you get a single-digit loan. But it's not specifically for mining, although I must qualify that by saying the Bank of Industry actually has a solid minerals desk that assesses and offers loans to players in the sector. The Nexim Bank also does have some funds for the sector, but these are funds that have either come via the central bank as the limited intervention fund or via some multinational development bank.
Now, I'm more interested in the 50 billion naira intervention fund provided by the CBN, but which we've come to believe is in the hands of the commercial banks. And the Miners Association of Nigeria, members of that association are saying they are having difficulty accessing this fund. They say when they approach the commercial banks, what they're told is there are no mining desks in the commercial banks, and they wonder why the fund wasn't given to development banks instead. What are you doing really to help them in this fast tracking mission with the commercial banks?
The first task I took, I'm aware of this challenge, and I'm in discussions with the Miners Association of Nigeria. But one of the first tasks that I accomplished coming to office was to set up a meeting with what is called the Bankers Committee of the CBN, which has, of course, all the managing directors of commercial banks and development banks as members. And I put it across to them that we need to have mining desks in the various banks, because only about 2 banks really have mining desks in the entire country. And they gave a pledge that they're going to start working towards it. But then, you know, banks are commercial operations. They're profit-driven. They're not non-governmental or non-profit institutions. So they want to be sure that this is something that would ultimately benefit them. And the argument I've put across to them is that you won't find if you don't seek. So you need people who actually understand mining, geologists, mining engineers that you recruit to manage this process, because they understand what mining is about and they can assess objectively. It's not just a degree in finance or banking that will give you that technical expertise. You need subject matter expertise and you need general finance expertise come together in order to assess objectively whatever it is that's placed before you. And we are prepared as a ministry to help these banks set up the mining desks in order to achieve this purpose. And the process is ongoing.
All right, then. Now, the mining sector is currently dominated by artisanal miners. What I want to know is, what's the government's artisanal mining strategy in the short to long term?
Well, I did mention earlier that we have a 2-pronged strategy. One is to ensure that if you're artisanal, you are legal and legitimate. And we must help you become legal. We must help you mainstream your activities. We must also help bring you into the revenue stream of government so that things are done in a manner that we can also protect you, particularly in terms of environmental safety and safer mining practices. And that's essentially what we're doing. But it's one thing to have a plan. You also need a strategy. We cannot do this because I cannot sit in this office and pretend that I can micromanage what is happening to artisanal miners all over the country. And that is why we must work with states. So what we have done is to get the buy-in of states to register their miners, and with that we provide support to the miners via the state and via the Miners Association of Nigeria, so that we help them with capacity building, we help them with tools, we help them with access to finance, and we help them with small-scale licenses, so that they too can begin to build their businesses Of course, they're not going to become Rio Tinto overnight. They're not going to become Glencore, but they can become junior miners and begin to build their own sectoral experience. And that's really our vision and our plan for the sector.
Now, talking about your vision, just talk us through this, the strategy or the vision behind this policy direction, which states the issuance of coal mining licenses only to companies interested in generating electricity from coal. What was the idea behind?
Well, the idea behind it is that Nigeria has an existential threat, which is obvious to everyone, which is lack of energy in our country. And in the strategy of the Ministry of Power, coal is in the energy mix. In many other countries, in South Africa today, probably up to about 40% of power generated comes from coal. Even in America, I'm not unmindful of the environmental issues surrounding the utilization of coal, but we have coal in Nigeria, and we don't have power. At least not in the megawattage that we require it. So if we can get power generated from coal by siting generating plants nearer the coal deposit, it's commonsensical for us to do it. The additional point to make is that Nigeria's coal is low sulfur coal. So in terms of clean coal energy, Nigeria's coal is even more susceptible to being cleaned up than most coal available in other parts of the world. So there is every reason for us to combine the entire gamut of opportunities to provide power in our country. Solar, we're interested. Renewable energy, we don't have any problem with it. Gas is in abundance, but we know what is happening in the Niger Delta. But it's not going to be forever. We would fix that, and gas would begin to also be piped for generation of coal and of power. And I can tell you that many in the industrial sector are already converting from gas to coal. I'm aware that a plant like Dangote in Obajana cement factory has converted to coal. I'm aware that Ashaka Lafarge has converted to coal because it's not only cheaper, but it's also faster to build coal plants.
Right, now, just in a nutshell, now while the country works to diversify its economy from oil, I ask, do you think we have fully harnessed the opportunities, the potential in Nigeria's oil and gas space?
Oh, clearly not. The opportunity remains limitless, but you can even get to that through proper geological prospectivity. We know for a fact that you can generate crude from bitumen. We have bitumen in abundance in Nigeria, which we haven't exploited at all. So we're not just talking of oil from hydrocarbons, but also oil from tar sands. And if you go offshore, there's even more opportunities to produce gas. Nigeria is actually more a gas nation than an oil nation, but we haven't fully utilized those opportunities. That's one. But we must also deal with the global trend. We cannot run away from that there is a surfeit of oil being produced. Iran is back in the market with about 3 million. America is producing oil from shale and has shunned the Nigerian oil that used to be the sweet crude that America depended on for a long time. Other countries in Africa that were never oil producing are now oil producing. So it makes absolutely good sense for us to move in multiple modes of generating revenue for our country. Because my own sense, and I'm not a geologist, I'm not an oil expert, but my sense is that the days of $100 per barrel in oil is gone. We're not likely to get back there for a long while, if we ever do. So in that sense, we must fill that gap.
Now, on a final note, in a nutshell again, give us an update on plans to monetize government's mining assets, specifically the Ajaokuta Steel project and the National Iron Ore Mining Company.
It's progressing well. I'm sure you're aware that we finally resolved the legal issues around Jalkota and signed a concession agreement, a modified settlement agreement on the 1st of August this year. What is happening now is due diligence audit, and we have some of the top experts working on this. PwC, Greenwich Trust, in Itakpe Mines, really looking at the nitty-gritty of the agreement that we've signed. And once that's done, it would culminate in the release of Ajaokuta back to us and the continued management of Itakpe for the next 7 years by the global infrastructure company. So we see ourselves within the next 150 days proceeding towards a public bid on the Ajaokuta steel plant.
Fantastic. I guess we'll just keep our fingers crossed and look forward to that particular development. Well, I've been speaking with the Minister of Mines and Steel Development, Kayode Fayemi, and that's it on this CNBC special interview with a focus on Nigeria's mining sector. I'm Onyi Sunday. Thank you so much for watching.